there's three voices that I do outside of just their regular, straightforward vocal, and I have names for them. One of them I call the Cobra.
Radio Free with episode 271. Has this ever happened to you? You've got this classic band that you've known the name of forever, and you know that you probably should listen to them, but you never get around to it. And then eventually you do get around to it, you listen to them, and it's like, surprise, they were great all along. And you feel silly? Most recently, this happened to me on episode 224 about Nostrand, but perhaps the most embarrassing iteration of this occurrence, for me at least, would be the band Bulldozer, who we're going to be covering this week. I mean, I have been listening to them for a while now, but I really should have started way back when. But I got a good explanation for why. It comes down to a duology of marketing errors, not really on the band's part themselves, but more on the part of people trying to sell this band, if that makes any sense. If you are unaware of Bulldozer, they're basically the first Italian black metal band, unless you use the merciful fate clause to kind of grandfather in Death SS. So obviously all the old heads out there go around saying stuff like, hell yeah, brother, they're the Venom of Italy. And that's marketing error number one for me, because one, it pretty massively undersells Bulldozer. I mean, describing any band as the such and such of insert country here is kind of doing them a disservice. But in the case of Bulldozer, it's also somewhat inaccurate, because the only stuff that really sounds like Venom would be their first 7-inch and then a few songs on their first album. More specifically, this song right here, side A of their first 7-inch, Fallen Angel. I'll give you that. This definitely sounds like Venom. And in fact, the Bulldozer guys were in contact with Venom very early on. The frontman of the band, A.C. Wilde, was actually given that name by Kronos of Venom himself. And yeah, the vocals, and especially the very new wave of British heavy metal sounding guitar work on this release in particular, it sounds like Venom. Albeit, I actually kind of like the lead guitar in early Bulldozer a little bit more than I like it in Venom. I mean, you hearing that harmonized solo right there? That's pretty fucking sexy, dude. But yeah, that's the first common misconception about Bulldozer, is that they're merely Italy's version of Venom. They sort of started out as that, but as you're going to find out over the course of this episode, they definitely do their own thing more often than not. Second big misconception actually comes from everybody's favorite cool black metal uncle, Fenriz. You see, back in 2004, Fenriz put out this compilation entitled Fenriz Presents the Best of Old School Black Metal. And, it's got a decent enough selection of stuff. Got Tormentor, Sodom, Destruction, Mayhem, Burzum. It's got the Venom song Warhead on there, which is actually my favorite Venom song, along with Manitou, because I'm a special fucking snowflake. But it's also got a few notable whoopsie doodles on his track list. For one, he's got Blasphemy on there, but it's not even an actual Blasphemy song. It's just the intro from Fallen Angel of Doom. So, some spooky choirs and weird noises, but no actual... So that's misstep number one. Misstep number two, it's got friggin' Nada Frost on there. And listen, I know you're friends with the guy Fenriz, but... Come on, man. We both know Nada Frost doesn't belong on there, particularly when bands like Sabbath or Grotesque are absent. In fact, I'm willing to bet I'm probably the first person that's even mentioned Nada Frost in the past 10 years. But by far the most egregious error in the track listing is the inclusion of Bulldozer's Whiskey Time. Now on the surface, this seems like a good enough idea. I mean, Whiskey Time's a fun song and all. It's got the big guitar noise intro that goes into the drum solo to get the crowd hyped up before the riffs start off And if this was the only Bulldozer song you'd ever heard, I could see why you might consider it to just be the Italian Venom. Honestly, more than anything, it reminds me of Speedwolf. Specifically the Speedwolf song entitled Speedwolf, which has a very similar main riff, and it even starts off the same way with a big guitar noise explosion going into the main riff. I guarantee Speedwolf were inspired by Bulldozer. And like Speedwolf, Whiskey Time is a whole lot of fun. It's a very well-written, fun metal song. Great in a live setting, particularly on that part that goes like... Rock and roll, motherfucker! So on the face of it, this seems like a decent enough addition to the old school black metal list. But here's the thing. I guarantee if you're within my age bracket, sort of like a middle millennial, Fenris Presents the Best of Old School Black Metal was almost certainly the first time you'd ever heard of Bulldozer. And if you're like me, you probably heard that song, you're like, yeah, it's fun, like whatever, great, fun speed metal song. Here's the thing, if you want to get people that are into black metal, with the burning the churches and the corpse paint and whatnot, to listen to Bulldozer, if you're doing the whole respect your elders, stay a while and listen bit, you don't intro Bulldozer with Whiskey Time. If you're gonna play something off the first album, you hit him with that cutthroat. That's more goddamn like it, dude. For 1985, this goes toe-to-toe with Bathory for being the most black metal that ever black metaled. Italian version of Venom? Get the fuck out of here.
You're a whiny cocksucker, you know that?
No! Andy Penigata's guitar playing, loose but not sloppy, utterly unique. Don Andras' drumming, chaotic as fuck, full of all these crazy fills. AC Wild's vocals, evil as fuck. The great soloing is back from the 7-inch, but given a much more chaotic and evil cast. But most importantly, Bulldozer know how to thrash. In fact, they know how to thrash better than almost everyone else playing black metal at the time, which has kind of always been their major calling card. I'd honestly put them right up there with Sodom in terms of really well-written thrash breaks that often occur in multiple complex stages. Like right here, they've moved in more of a speed metal thing, building up to the solos, which interestingly enough almost kind of have like an evil power metal feeling to them at times, that again is pretty much unique to Bulldozer as far as black metal goes. Lead guitar with a very considered sense of structure and epic narrative. Basically, if I had heard this way back when on that black metal comp, I would have been a Bulldozer maniac way the fuck back in high school instead of, years and years and years later. There you go. That's my excuse for not getting into Bulldozer sooner. It's all you people's fault. And as great as Cutthroat is as an intro to Bulldozer, it's not even my personal favorite song on the album. That award has to go to the wonderfully titled Insurrection of the Living Damned, which helps establish another Bulldozer trademark going forward, that being their inclusion of a very foreboding intro guitar riff set before hitting the main riff of the song, which, like in the case of Cutthroat, is very loose and chaotic, but not actually sloppy. In fact, it has a surprising degree of technicality to it, especially for primitive 80s black metal stuff. I know a lot of times people like to describe certain guitar sounds as being like a chainsaw. Here, the guitar playing itself feels like Andy's really just sawing across those chords, very vicious, particularly in this section of the song, which leads into an interesting variation of the song's main riff, now given a much more morbid, dissonant cast with these hanging, nasty sounding chords going into the end of the song. Which actually features an ultra brutal sort of false ending fake out. You think it's going to go out on that scream because all the music stopped, but it comes back in with this entirely new set of riffs that once again fucking Sodom would kill for. Just total groovy blackened thrash madness. It's like the hidden final boss of the song has finally showed up. Got all these weird Celtic frost string bend techniques going on too. Yeah, there's like Whiskey Time and Fallen Angel. I'll give you that Italian Venom. The rest of the album, though, it's like just super morbid early black metal, and it's great. The follow-up album, The Final Separation, continues farther down that darkened path. Interestingly, it seems like the Japanese were the ones that really got what Bulldozer was trying to do. This set of dark melodic riffs right here is probably the most Sabbath-sounding thing that was ever not actually written by the band Sabbath. But the vocals on this album, man. So unique sounding. He manages to take this sort of hoarse black metal shouting and actually add a tinge of melody to it. This album also considerably ups the complexity of the songwriting, which is saying something because a lot of the songs on that first Bulldozer album weren't very simple at all, despite what that label of Italian Venom might have you think. But now we got this really interesting interaction between guitar and bass going on, even a little bit of bass solo going on, and there's also lots of very complex solos, clean guitar intros. The whole thing even closes off with like a 10-minute long song. So it definitely ups the ante as far as the various bells and whistles of epic 1980s black metal song composition goes, particularly for 1986. Honestly, rather than being the Italian Venom, if you have to do the such and such of insert country here, I would say Bulldozer are more like the Italian Bathory in terms of just these massive leaps they got going on between albums. And the jump from The Final Separation to their 1987 album, just entitled 9, is some fucking superhero shit. This album puts the radical in radical centrists. Because on one hand, they got this song called Ilona the Very Best, wherein I can sense that I'm a bit of a kindred spirit with Mr. A.C. Wild. I'm honestly shocked that I haven't written my own black metal song entitled Geo the Very Best yet. But yeah, he wrote a song about one of his idols, and his idol, Ilona Staller, was a Hungarian-Italian performance artist in, we'll just say some rather adult-oriented contexts.
You are hentai?
제가 V앱을 너무 안 한다고.
There you go, that's a good way of putting it. She's his favorite gravure idol. Emphasis on the gravure. And given the subject matter, you might think he'd just make it a silly song like Whiskey Time. But Homeboy ain't gonna do his forever waifu like that. Instead, we get a whole slew of new techniques being utilized by the band, notably some incorporation of very ahead of their time 90s style black metal tremolo riffs, as well as some really weird, dissonant voivod sounding chords. They've also got a new drummer this time around, Rob Christo Cabrini, who puts in a very intense performance. Stylistically, there's been a pretty major jump, incorporating some almost SOD-style crossover thrash, albeit still with a very noticeable black metal tinge to it. It's kind of like they took an 80s black metal riff and then played it palm muted and sped up like a hardcore riff, and then put these super fast, shouty vocals over it in the style of an SOD or a DRI. Blackened crossover thrash. Guaranteed Bulldozer are probably the first fucking band to do that. But earlier on, I said they were very radical centrists, and that both sides of the spectrum are equally represented. So right after that Woman Appreciator anthem, they hit you with a song literally entitled Misogynists, featuring such eminently quotable lyrical couplets as
Women, why do they exist? Bitches, they want to destroy you. They take your soul and try to rot your brain. Masturbation. You won't get AIDS, just use your hand. Save your money, only 5 minutes and you feel so great.
Paging based department.
As you might expect, this song carries a very angry tone, starting off with this sort of proto-death metal, almost massacre style riff, before heading into some more 80s style thrash. This song's vocals are probably the best on the album. The chorus of this song is perhaps the best example ever of A.C. Wild combining melodic vocals with a hoarse black metal style, and it's a total earworm. Guarantee that's going to be stuck in your head tomorrow morning. And it has such a positive message to it. Going into another example of Bulldozer's guitar playing being very ahead of their time. Again, this sounds a lot like 90s Scandinavian stuff, but it's happening in 1987. Particularly this little bass and drum accent right here, which honestly wouldn't sound out of place on a record like De Mysteriis non Satanas, and yet it jumps into this total 80s thrash metal solo. There's such a unique and interesting style this band has going. But if you want to talk about unique and interesting, you got to get to the fourth Bulldozer album, because this is the uniquest, interestingest they ever got. And whilst their first album, The Day of Wrath, will probably always be my favorite of the Bulldozer catalog, this one comes in a close second. We're talking about Nero Deliria, named after a band started by Bulldozer's original bassist, who left after the Fallen Angel single and ended up committing suicide in 1988. That's why this is the only classic Bulldozer album that doesn't have A.C. Wild on the album cover. Instead, we got a picture of Dario. Fittingly, this album concludes the Ilona saga with the song Ilona Had Been Elected, in honor of the fact that Ilona Staller actually was elected to Italian Parliament. She was actually in and out of politics for a while. She attempted to end the Gulf War by offering to have sex with Saddam Hussein. She also tried the same thing in 2006 with Osama bin Laden. So yeah, she's kind of a daffy broad, and appropriately, this is probably the wackiest Bulldozer song. It's got a whole lot of spooky ambient sections like the one you're hearing right now that then lead into some very, again, ahead of its time, almost 90s sounding melodic black metal stuff with full chords and organ incorporation. But when that verse riff kicks in, Bulldozer don't really sound like anybody else. The only thing I can really compare this to is maybe Rigor Mortis or Macabre, and even then that's just because of the technicality of the rhythm guitar playing and how ahead of its time everything sounds. Like when you go through this album, you hear shit that sounds like stuff you wouldn't hear later until like Immortal and Burzum. Really, really ahead of its time, super intense, and yet it maintains that thrash metal groovy catchy edge. Like listen to these layered chords right here. Nobody else doing shit like this in the 80s. Even the solo sections are very clever in how they're constructed. Like the under solo riff right here is actually a really clever variation on the opening riff of the song. That recursive solo figure is heavy as fuck. Back into, again, those very 90s black metal sounding chords. And it wasn't just the black metal that got really updated for this album. This is also probably the highest level their thrashing ever reached, with songs like Mors tua vita mea. Wait, are you hearing that shit, man? That's Demolition Hammer level intensity. Total death thrash brutality. Dark Angel, Morbid Saint, maybe even Sadist. Getting sent home on a stretcher. And yet, if you listen for it, they still have that evil black metal sense of melody to it, hiding in between the tech thrash flourishes. This is some of the most brutal and punishing thrash metal out there, and yet it maintains this level of clinical precision. But what really sticks out is the groove sections, where they ask a very important question.
What's heavier than Pantera?
This is heavier than Pantera. Honestly, it sounds like something that you might hear in a 90s groove metal song, but it's in the 80s, and it's a whole hell of a lot more brutal, and a whole hell of a lot more intelligently written, with these weird layered dissonant chords over it. Not only were these guys 90s black metal before 90s black metal, they were prong before prong. So Nero Deliri, definitely the peak of Bulldozer as far as like technicality and overall weirdness goes. Personally, I think that enough of that weirdness leans in that sort of black metal direction that I would still classify as black thrash, but I know there's a decent chunk of the Bulldozer fan base that can't stand this album. Whatever. Anyways, within a couple years they had broken up and everybody was following other musical ventures. Notably, the guitarist Andy went on to become a session keyboardist for Death SS and actually wrote some of the songs on my personal favorite Death SS album, Heavy Demons. But AC Wild really got into making like electronic music, dance stuff, and he actually had a pretty successful go at it. So successful, in fact, that he sort of brought Bulldozer back for 1 year in 1992, mostly as a joke, to do sort of like a danceable Bulldozer electronic-ish sort of song that a whole lot of people seem to hate. And it's kind of hard to hear why at first, because this riff, while simpler than older Bulldozer, doesn't seem that far off from the kind of groove shit that was going on that Mors Via Tuta Mea song. But then the vocals kick in and it's certainly a more rhythmic approach than what he did in the 80s, to put it lightly. And the keyboards kick in and someone starts rapping, and now you know why people really fucking hate Dance Got Sick. But you know what? I'm about to drop my hottest take ever. Nope, don't try to stop me. I'm gonna say it. I don't know if it's all the K-pop or the fact that I really got into keyboards, but I honestly don't hate this song. There's like a goofy one-off joke song. It fucking destroys like that weird time Obituary tried to rap, or honestly pretty much any nu metal ever. I mean, these guitar riffs are fucking solid. But yeah, no, a lot of older Bulldozer fans really hated that song. But you know who didn't hate it? Was the Japanese. It actually was very successful over there. So much so, in fact, that AC Wild actually moved to Japan to start producing electronic music, being part of a long tradition of a sort of a weird crossover that goes on between Japanese and Italian dance music, going way back to the 70s and 80s. Look up Mussolini's granddaughter's city pop album sometime. Some wacky shit. You might actually be familiar with some of AC Wild's Japanese electronic music ventures without even realizing it. He produced a lot of songs for idols like Amuro Namie, did a whole shit ton of weird like house and Eurobeat records, and even did some work on anime, notably the initial D series. That's right, the dude from Bulldozer was heavily involved in the creative process that brought you. But it was in Japan that the seeds for the rebirth of Bulldozer were sown. Because obviously with bands like Abigail and Sabbath, they were in the Bulldozer. And when the Italian power metal band Labyrinth happened to be touring Japan, they brought, I believe, their tour manager at the time, AC Wild from Bulldozer, out on stage for some Bulldozer songs. People fucking loved it. AC Wild was feeling it, said, fuck it, let's restart Bulldozer. And he got back everybody from the 80s, except for Rob Clister Cabrini, the drummer, who, according to official sources, turned down the offer for the reunion because of his great weight, which prevents him from playing the drums, which has got to be the most eloquent way of saying,
This fat son of a bitch is gonna drown us all out! Calm down. He's fat!
that I've ever heard. But perhaps most surprising of all, especially if you know how my tastes tend to run, I actually really like the Bulldozer Reunion album, mostly because it kind of continues that legacy they had in the 80s of having very noticeable stylistic progression between each release while still maintaining that kind of black metal atmosphere. The latest material from Bulldozer actually incorporates a lot of elements of like power metal and even some shred bordering on Visual K stuff, but it manages to maintain that very sharp thrash edge that was present on the Nero Deliria album. There's a whole lot of guest solo spots from some really famous people, perhaps most notably from Angra and later Megadeth, Kiko Dorero. Something about the way they do guitar harmonies on this album sounds very Japanese to me, I don't know. Maybe living in Japan rubbed off on AC Wild. I mean, he wrote that song in the 80s about rubbing one off.
Oh, rim shot!
Still got plenty of those gang shouts, but they're mixed in with the guitar harmonies. And overall, I think it's a pretty fucking cool album. Honestly, I enjoy pretty much everything Bulldozer's ever done, even the goofy, jokey electronic stuff, what little I've heard of it. And if you're like me back in the day, and you kind of skipped over Bulldozer for whatever reason, I would recommend rectifying that situation immediately because they are fantastic. Currently, one of the bands I've been listening to the most, as a matter of fact. Hopefully you enjoyed me jibber-jabbering about them for this elongated episode. Thanks for watching or listening to whatever you did, and I'll see you next time.
I don't need to have a shit ton of alcohol before 5 o'clock, so it's like, oh wait, it's 6 o'clock right now, so it's after 5 o'clock. Fuck the years.